The night air in Ashford Creek, Tennessee sits heavy in late October. Thick with wood smoke and the kind of cold that sneaks under your collar and stays there, pressing against the back of your neck like a hand that means to remind you of something. I'm standing at the bedroom window of the house I've lived in for exactly 23 days, staring out at the dark row of pine trees along the back fence, watching the man I married sleep like he hasn't got a single thing weighing on his conscience. He looks peaceful. That's the word. Peaceful, in the way of someone who has made all his decisions and is entirely comfortable with every one of them. His face is different when he sleeps. The tension he carries in his jaw and around his eyes goes loose, and he looks younger. Less like a man who runs a billion-dollar timber company and more like someone who simply exists. For a strange, disorienting moment, I find him beautiful. Then I remember why I'm standing here instead of lying beside him, and the feeling closes back up like a fist. His name is Cole Hargrove. And 3 weeks ago, I believed, truly, foolishly believed, that marrying him might be the beginning of something real. Tonight I know better. I went looking for him an hour ago. Couldn't sleep. The house felt wrong, the way it always does, too big, too quiet, too many rooms I'm not allowed to feel comfortable in. I found him in the study on the main floor, the door cracked open, warm amber light spilling into the hallway. I raised my hand to knock. Then I heard laughter. His laughter. Low and easy and real in a way I had never once heard it directed at me. The sound stopped me where I stood. In 23 days of marriage, I had heard Cole Hargrove produce exactly 2 sounds with any warmth in them. A brief exhale through his nose when something on his phone amused him, and a single quiet word of thanks when Mrs. Pruitt brought him his morning coffee. Not this. Not a laugh like that. Full and unguarded, like something he hadn't bothered to keep contained. And then I heard her voice. Vivienne Cross. His family's estate attorney. Sharp as cut glass, with a way of looking at me like I'm something that wandered in off the street and hasn't been asked to leave yet. You can't honestly tell me you wanted this, Vivienne said. Amused. Intimate. The kind of voice that knows it's standing close enough to matter. A pause. And then Cole, my husband, said it. Wanted her? She was the condition of the deal. Nothing more. Something cracked behind my ribs. Clean and quiet and permanent. And the marriage? Vivienne pressed. Surely even you feel something. Another pause. Longer. Long enough that some small, stupid part of me held its breath hoping for a different answer. It means nothing. She means nothing. Vivienne laughed, soft and satisfied, and that sound scraped across my skin like I'd walked through something cold and wet and couldn't get clean again. I stepped back from the door. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. But I didn't make a sound. I am my father's daughter in that way. We Calloways do not fall apart where anyone can see us. We wait. We hold. We find somewhere private first. I walked back up the stairs. I did not pack. I did not leave a note. I didn't take the pearl earrings his mother had pressed into my palm on our wedding day with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes, or the new clothes hanging in the closet that still had their tags on, or the leather-bound journal he'd left on the nightstand that I'd been too afraid to open in case it confirmed everything I'd already suspected. I took nothing. Because nothing in that house was ever really mine. I took my keys. My coat. The small silver bracelet my grandmother left me that I'd worn every day since I was 17, thin and slightly tarnished, engraved on the inside with 3 words in her handwriting. You are enough. I used to believe her. Tonight I needed to believe her again. And I walked out the front door of Cole Hargrove's house in Ashford Creek, Tennessee, at 2:47 in the morning, and I did not look back. Welcome to Flox's Shifter Romance Tales. Stories of forbidden bonds. Dangerous mates. Before the story begins, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. It truly supports the channel. Now, let the story take you. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood at the altar of First Methodist Church in my mother's altered wedding dress and told myself that this was survival. That was the word I used. Survival. Not happiness. Not love. Not even hope, exactly. Just the steady, practical act of continuing to exist in a world that had spent the last 2 years trying to flatten me. My name is Nora Calloway. I'm 28 years old, and up until 18 months ago, I was the youngest marketing director in the history of Calloway Family Timber, the company my grandfather built from a single sawmill and 30 acres of East Tennessee hardwood, that my father expanded across 3 states and into a name people in the industry recognized, that my older brother Derek was supposed to inherit before a gambling addiction and a string of catastrophic decisions left us bleeding out from the inside. Derek is 2 years older than me. Growing up, he was the golden one, broad-shouldered, easy-laughing, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately knows where to stand so everyone can see him. My father adored him. The company adored him. I adored him too, for a long time, because he was my brother and because he had a way of making you feel, when he turned his attention on you, like you were the only person in the world. What I didn't know, what none of us knew until it was almost too late, was that Derek had been unraveling quietly for years. The gambling started small, the way those things do. A poker night here, a weekend trip to Nashville there. By the time it became a problem, it had been a problem for a long time. He borrowed against the company. Then borrowed again. Then hid in the debt the way only someone who knows where all the paperwork is kept can hide it, deep in the filings, disguised as operating costs, spread across accounts that even our CFO hadn't thought to question. By the time I found it, we were $18 million underwater and the bank was already circling. The Hargroves had been our biggest competitor for 30 years. Cole's father, Robert Hargrove, had tried 3 times to buy us out and been refused every time by my grandfather, and then by my father, and then by me when it was briefly my decision to make. We didn't sell to Hargrove Timber. It was practically a family commandment, etched into the company's DNA along with our logo and our founding date. But then my father had a heart attack. Massive, his doctor said, with a directness I have never fully forgiven. Massive. Like a weather event. Something geological. He survived, but barely, and the recovery was going to be long. And Derek's debts came due while my father was still in the ICU, and I was the only Calloway left standing in the building when Robert Hargrove came to the table with an offer that wasn't really an offer at all. It was a lifeline with a condition attached. The condition was me. Not in some antiquated, transactional way. Or at least, that's what Robert had assured my father in the hospital room while my dad was still hooked up to monitors and too weak to argue. It would be good for the merger. Good optics. 2 families, 1 company, a clean story for the shareholders and the press. Cole needed to settle down anyway, Robert had said, and I'd sat in the corner of that hospital room listening to a man describe my future in the same tone you'd used to discuss zoning permits, and I had not said a single word. Because my father was alive. Because the company would survive. Because sometimes you don't get to choose, you just get to decide how you carry what you've been given. Nobody asked me if I agreed. I'd met Cole exactly once before the engagement was announced. He had come to our offices on a Tuesday in March, 8 o'clock in the morning, which I later understood was a power move, showing up before business hours to signal that his schedule operated on a different clock than everyone else's. He was immaculate in a charcoal suit, with dark eyes that moved around the room cataloging everything the way an appraiser walks through a house they're about to lowball. He shook my hand with one firm, brief shake and said it was good to meet me in the tone of someone completing a required courtesy before getting to the actual agenda. He had looked at me the way you look at a clause in a contract, something to be acknowledged, processed, and moved past. I had looked back with every ounce of dignity I had left, which, after 18 months of watching my family's legacy dissolve around me while I tried to hold it together with spreadsheets and sheer stubbornness, was not much. But it was mine. Every scrap of it. The wedding was small and efficient, the way Cole Hargrove apparently preferred all things. 40 guests. A reception that lasted exactly 2 hours before his assistant materialized with a reminder about an early morning call with the Pacific Northwest office. I had worn my mother's dress, taken in at the waist by Mrs. Elaine Bishop from the alterations shop on Larimer Street, who had measured me in silence and sent me home with a paper bag full of scalloped lace trim she'd had to remove and a look on her face that I chose not to interpret. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I moved through Cole's house. I refused to call it our house, even in my head, like a ghost who hadn't quite accepted her situation. His housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, answered my questions with clipped efficiency and nothing warmer. She wasn't unkind. She was simply loyal to Cole in the way longtime household staff become loyal to the person who signs their checks, and I was a recent addition whose permanence had not yet been established. His colleagues at dinner parties looked through me the way you look through a window when you're interested in what's outside. The wives were politely friendly in the careful way of women who aren't sure yet what category to put you in. I ate alone most mornings. I slept alone every night. Even on the nights Cole was in the same bed, there was a wall of silence between us so solid it had its own temperature, cold, and perfectly maintained, like a museum exhibit behind glass. He never touched me. Never asked how I was adjusting. Never asked anything at all, really, beyond the occasional logistical question, would I be attending the Hargrove Foundation Gala? Did I have any dietary restrictions for the business dinner on Thursday? Had I received the calendar invite for the family portraits? Questions that required one-word answers and produced no information about either of us as actual human beings. I told myself I was fine with it. That I hadn't expected warmth. That this was a transaction and I was simply completing my end of it with as much grace as I could manage. I reorganized the Calloway files I'd brought with me. I started running in the mornings on the back roads around the neighborhood, which was one of the few times I felt anything close to free. I read 3 books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I planted a small herb garden in the side bed outside the kitchen window without asking anyone's permission, and when Mrs. Pruitt discovered it she simply adjusted her shopping list for fresh rosemary and said nothing. Small rebellions. Small survivals. Tonight I could not sleep. The house was too quiet, too cold, and something restless had been building in my chest for days, a pressure I couldn't name and couldn't release. I rose at 2 a.m, pulled on my robe, and went downstairs. Not to find Cole. Exactly. More because the 4 walls of that guest room turned master suite were starting to feel like a very tasteful cage with very high thread count sheets. I found him in the study. The door was cracked. Warm light and the smell of whiskey and old paper spilled into the hallway. I heard voices, raised my hand to knock. And then I heard Vivienne Cross say my name. I heard she reorganized the Calloway archives last week, Vivienne was saying, in the amused tone of someone describing a harmless eccentricity. All by herself. Like some kind of nesting instinct. Isn't that sweet? Cole's voice. Leave it. Oh, come on. A rustling sound. Like fabric shifting, like someone settling closer. We both know why she's here. Your father needed a symbol to sell the merger to the Calloway board. So he handed you one. But you cannot tell me you actually want her. Silence. I stopped breathing. Wanted her? Cole said finally. She was the condition of the deal. Nothing more. I pressed my back against the hallway wall. The plaster was cold through my robe. My chest was doing something I didn't have a word for, not breaking, exactly, because I hadn't given it enough to fully break. More like a slow, quiet collapse of something I hadn't admitted I was still holding on to. Some small, stubborn thread of belief that maybe the silence between us was temporary. That maybe he was someone worth waiting for. And the marriage. Vivienne pressed. The intimacy in her voice was unmistakable. Surely even you feel something. Cole's answer came flat and final and devastatingly certain. It means nothing. She means nothing. Vivienne laughed. Soft. Satisfied. Like someone who had been waiting a long time to hear exactly those words. I peeled myself off the wall and walked back upstairs with the careful, deliberate steps of someone carrying something that will shatter if they move too fast. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and I thought very clearly, with a calm that surprised me, about what my options were. I could stay. Finish what I'd started. Fulfill my part of the arrangement. Show up to the galas and the dinners and the family portraits, smile at the right people, say the right things, and spend the next however many years being the condition of the deal, nothing more, in a house that didn't want me. My father's company would stay solvent. The merger would proceed. Derek would get the fresh start he'd been handed despite everything he'd done to destroy what our grandfather built. And I would grow old and invisible inside a marriage that had been designed, from the very beginning, to use me up. Or I could leave. The choice, when I laid it out that plainly, wasn't a choice at all. I took my grandmother's bracelet off the nightstand, clicked it around my wrist, felt the familiar weight of it settle against my pulse point. You are enough. I picked up my car keys and my coat and I walked out the front door into the October dark. I drove without a destination for over an hour. The back roads around Ashford Creek are a series of switchbacks through pine forest and farmland, the kind of roads where you can go 4 to 5 minutes in any direction and feel like the last person on earth. I drove with the heat blasting and the radio off and let the road take me wherever it wanted, because for the first time in 2 years someone else wasn't telling me where I needed to be. It took me to the Blackwater River trailhead. An old day-use area about 12 miles outside of town, closed for the season. The wooden sign at the entrance faded to gray by sun and rain. I parked in the empty lot, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark with my hands in my lap and the first real silence I'd experienced since I moved into Cole Hargrove's house. No ambient noise of someone else's life pressing through the walls. No footsteps on hardwood. No hum of efficient machinery. Just the wind off the river and the sound of my own breathing. That was when I heard the crying. The sound was faint and muffled, coming from somewhere past the tree line. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. The wind off the river does strange things at night, bending through the pines in a way that can sound almost human. I sat very still with my hands on the steering wheel and I listened. There it was again. A child crying. I was out of the car before I'd made a conscious decision to move. The trail was dark, but the moon was full and the frost on the ground caught the light and turned the whole forest silver. My breath came out in clouds. I moved fast, following the sound past the trailhead kiosk, its glass cracked and fogged, the park map inside still cheerfully directing visitors to the river lookout and the picnic shelter, and through a stand of bare-limbed oaks until I reached the bank of the creek that fed into the main river. And there, in the shallow ravine where the bank dropped off into a tangle of exposed roots and mossy rock, huddled with her knees pulled to her chest, was a little girl. She was small, maybe 7 years old. Her clothes were filthy and too thin for the cold. A denim jacket with a cartoon bear on the pocket, leggings printed with small yellow stars, one sneaker on her right foot and a dirty sock with no shoe on her left. Her dark hair was tangled with leaves and she was clutching a backpack, purple, covered in small iron-on patches of planets and constellations, so tightly that her knuckles had gone the pale gray color of the creek stones around her. She heard me coming and her head snapped up, eyes wide and wild and ready to bolt like a deer that has heard the twig snap and is calculating angles. "Hey," I said, stopping where I was. Hands up, palms out, the way you'd approach a frightened animal when you need it to understand you're not a threat. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Nora. What's yours?" She stared at me for a long, measuring moment. The moonlight caught her eyes and they were extraordinary, one a warm dark brown like creek water in summer, one a clear pale gray like winter sky. Mismatched and watchful and far too old for her small face. "Lily," she said finally. The word barely made it past her teeth. "Lily." I smiled carefully and crouched down so we were closer to eye level, my knees pressing into the cold dirt. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Then, after a pause, "Cold. And hungry." I had nothing in my coat pockets but my phone, my keys, and a crumpled gas station receipt from 2 weeks ago. "I have a car," I said. "It's warm. I think there's a granola bar in the glove compartment. Would you come with me?" Her eyes tracked past me to where the parking lot was barely visible through the trees. The calculation on her face was painful to watch in a child that young, the weighing of risk against need, survival math done in real time. My mama said not to get in cars with strangers. "Your mama is right. She sounds very smart." I sat down on the cold ground, close enough to be companionable, far enough not to crowd her. "Where is she?" Lily's lower lip trembled. She held herself still against it with a discipline that broke my heart. "She said to wait here. She said she'd come back." She paused, and in that pause was 3 days of a 7-year-old sitting alone in a ravine in October, believing because her mother had told her to believe. That was 3 days ago. 3 days. My stomach dropped. "Do you know what happened to her?" "The men came." Lily's voice dropped to barely a breath. "The ones who were following us. Mama heard them on the trail and she hid my backpack and me in here and she said, she stopped, pressed her lips together, breathed carefully through her nose the way someone does when they are holding themselves together by sheer will. She said she loved me and to wait for someone safe. She said I'd know when I found them." I looked at this child, alone in the woods for 3 days in October, surviving on whatever she'd had in that backpack, while God knows what had happened to her mother just 20 yards up a trail, and I felt something open up inside me. Raw and fierce and completely unexpected. The same feeling I'd had 18 months ago standing in my father's office looking at Derek's hidden debt and thinking, not on my watch. Not while I'm standing here. "Lily," I said quietly. "I think I might be someone safe." She studied me with those searching eyes. Then her gaze dropped to my wrist, the thin silver bracelet catching the moonlight, and something shifted in her expression. A softening. Like a door unlocking. "You're sad," she said. Just like that. Flat statement, no question mark. I blinked. "What?" "Around your eyes. You look like my mama did when she was scared but didn't want to show it." She tilted her head. "Did someone do something bad to you tonight?" The question hit harder than it should have. I swallowed. "Something like that." Lily considered this with the gravity of a small philosopher who has already learned that the adult world is more complicated than advertised, and has decided to take that information seriously. Then she uncurled slightly from against the rock and reached her hand out toward me. Her fingers were ice cold and impossibly small, and she put them in mine like she was placing something fragile in the hands of someone she hoped could hold it. "Mama said that when sad people find each other, they should stick together."
She held my gaze with those mismatched eyes.
She said that's how the world gets less lonely.
I took her hand.
I pulled her gently to her feet, and then I just picked her up, because the ground was frozen and she only had one shoe and 3 days was a very long time to be 7 years old and alone, and I carried her back through the silver-lit pines to my car.
She weighed almost nothing.
She smelled like cold air and cedar and something underneath that reminded me of my grandmother's house in autumn, with smoke and dried herbs, and she pressed her face against my shoulder like she'd been waiting a very long time for someone to carry her.
I blasted the heat.
Found the granola bar, peanut butter chocolate chip, the kind that tastes like a compromise between health food and candy, and a lukewarm gas station hot chocolate I'd completely forgotten in the back seat. I wrapped my coat around her because she was still shaking even after the heat kicked in, and sat in the driver's seat trying to figure out what came next. The logical thing was to call the police. File a missing person report for Lily's mother. Hand Lily over to the proper authorities and let the system do what it was designed to do. It was the responsible choice, the procedurally correct choice. Don't call the police. Lily said it quietly, without looking up from the granola bar, like she'd read my mind through the back of my head. I looked at her. Why?
She pulled the backpack onto her lap and unzipped the front pocket.
She took out a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from repeated handling, the way something gets when it's been opened and refolded too many times by anxious hands. She held it out to me with the careful gravity of someone delivering something important. Mama told me if anything happened, I had to find this person first.
She paused.
Before anyone official. I unfolded the paper in the glow of the dashboard lights. It was a photograph, printed from a computer, slightly grainy, the kind of image you'd get from a Google search result. A man with dark eyes and a serious face and silver just beginning at his temples. Strong jaw, a mouth set in a line that suggested default reserve rather than default warmth. Beneath the photo, a name written in a careful, looping hand.
Cole Hargrove. I sat very still for a long moment.
The heater hummed its steady note. Lily ate her granola bar in small, deliberate bites, watching me.
That's the man, Lily said. Mama said he owed her something.
She said he'd know what to do. I looked at my husband's face in the grainy photograph, the man who had spoken those 6 words not 3 hours ago with the casual certainty of someone stating a fact about the weather, and felt the night tilt sideways beneath me in a way that had nothing to do with the cold.
Cole woke at 6:15 to an empty bed and cold sheets.
He reached for warmth that wasn't there, an instinct so automatic he didn't recognize it as one until his hand found nothing but linen.
He sat up sharply, scanned the room in the gray pre-dawn light. Her robe hung on its hook by the bathroom door. Her shoes sat neatly by the closet.
The nightstand held her book, her water glass, still half full, and the small silver bracelet she never took off. The one she'd worn every single day for the 23 days she'd been in this house, through breakfasts and dinners and formal events and early mornings when he'd watched her leave for her run without speaking and wished, not for the first time, that he knew how to be the kind of man who said good morning like he meant it.
The bracelet stopped him cold. He had never seen Nora without it.
Not once in 23 days. He was downstairs in under a minute, moving through the house room by room with a tightening in his chest he didn't know what to call. He wasn't a man who named his feelings readily. He understood this about himself, had always understood it as a structural fact rather than a flaw to be corrected. But whatever this was, it had teeth. It was pressing against the inside of his ribcage in a way that demanded acknowledgement. The kitchen was empty. The study empty. The library, the dining room, the back porch. The garage. Her car was gone. Mrs. Pruitt arrived at 7 and went pale when he asked if she'd seen Mrs. Hargrove. She hadn't. The security system log showed Nora leaving at 2:52 a.m. through the front door.
No alarm triggered. No text sent. No note left anywhere in the house.
Cole stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand and tried to understand what he was feeling. Because it wasn't the detached concern of a man whose business arrangement had developed a complication. It wasn't the measured calculation of someone assessing risk and response. It was something sharper and more urgent than that, something with edges, something that felt uncomfortably like the word he'd spent 23 days refusing to apply to a woman he'd told himself, repeatedly, was simply a circumstance.
He called her phone. Voicemail.
The sound of her recorded voice, brisk, professional, slightly warmer than she was in person, hit him in the center of his chest.
He called again. Voicemail.
He stood at the window looking out at the pine trees that lined the back fence and replayed the previous night with a ruthless precision he applied to everything that mattered. The conversation in his study. Vivian's questions. She had been asking those kinds of questions for weeks, he realized now, mapping the territory between him and Nora, probing for exactly the kind of vulnerability she'd found last night. His own answers, snapped out in irritation, meant to end the line of questioning rather than to express anything true.
Wanted her? She was the condition of the deal. He said the words back to himself.
Heard them the way someone else might hear them, stripped of context, stripped of the exasperation that had shaped them, stripped of the decades of boardroom language he'd been throwing back in Vivienne's face. He had been parroting the worst possible version of his own motivations to make her stop treating him like a man with uncomplicated feelings. To end the conversation before it became something he wasn't prepared to have with Vivienne, of all people.
But if Nora had been in that hallway, if she had heard only those fragments, she means nothing. Cole set down his coffee. His jaw worked.
He had spent 23 days keeping his distance from Nora Calloway because he genuinely, honestly did not know how to do otherwise. Because she had come into his home under impossible circumstances, under terms that should have made her resentful and brittle, and instead she had moved through the rooms of his life with a quiet dignity that made him feel things he didn't have language for. He had watched her plant herbs outside the kitchen window and thought, for one unguarded moment, that no one had ever done anything that made his house look more like a home. And rather than learn the language for any of it, rather than say a single word, he had maintained distance like it was a virtue.
He had been an absolute fool.
He called Marcus Webb, his head of security, former Blount County Sheriff's deputy, a man Cole trusted with every complicated thing in his life because Marcus had a rare combination of capability and discretion. Marcus tracked Nora's car via its GPS to the Blackwater River trailhead before Cole had finished explaining the situation. "Car's been there since about 3 a.m., Marcus reported. "She hasn't moved. Engine's been off since 3:04.
Cole was in his truck in under 4 minutes.
He found her car in the empty trailhead lot, engine off, windows fogged with the condensation of breath and body heat.
He pulled up beside it and tapped on the glass.
The window rolled down and Nora looked at him. Not startled, not tearful, just very, very still in the particular way of someone who has been sitting with difficult things for a long time and made their peace with whatever came next.
Her eyes were red around the edges but dry. She looked like someone who had cried and then made a decision. Beside her in the passenger seat was a child. A small girl with dark tangled hair and mismatched eyes, one brown, one gray, with a planet-covered backpack clutched in her lap, looking at Cole with the focused, cataloging intensity of someone conducting an assessment they have been waiting to conduct for a long time. "She knows who you are," Nora said. Her voice was flat with exhaustion, stripped of the careful politeness she'd been maintaining for 3 weeks. There was something else underneath it. Something direct and clear and entirely uninterested in managing his comfort. It was, Cole realized, the first time he'd heard her actual voice. "Her mother left her a photograph of you." Cole went very still. "Her mother's name is," Nora paused, glanced at the child. "Diana," Lily said. She was looking at Cole with a steadiness that made him feel, in a way he hadn't felt since he was a child himself, like he was being seen all the way through. "Diana Marsh. She said you owed her." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything. Diana Marsh. Cole got out of his truck slowly. He crouched down beside Lily's window. She'd rolled it down a few cautious inches, watchful, and looked at the child's face. One brown eye. One gray. The gray one was Diana's. He remembered it exactly. He had looked into that gray eye for 3 hours on the side of Route 9 while she kept him talking, kept him conscious, told him about the constellations visible through the shattered windshield because she said it was important to keep him focused on something beautiful. 2 years ago, he said carefully, I was in a car accident on Route 9. December. A snowstorm that came in faster than the forecast said it would. My truck went off the road at the curve by Harlan Hollow and I was unconscious when someone pulled me out. He paused, choosing words with unusual care. Your mother was driving behind me. She saw it happen. She pulled over and she came down the embankment and she stayed with me for 3 hours in below freezing temperatures, talking to me, keeping me awake, until the paramedics arrived. She saved my life. Lily's grip on the backpack tightened until her fingers went white. She never told me that story. I tried to find her afterward. She'd given the paramedics a false name and a phone number that didn't work. Cole's voice roughened at the edges, the way it does when you've rehearsed the shame of a thing so many times it's worn smooth but not gone. I spent 2 years trying to find the woman who saved my life and thank her properly. I never could. I thought about her every time I drove that stretch of Route 9. He met the child's strange, ancient eyes.
I promised myself that if I ever did find her, I would make sure she was safe. That promise still stands.
Lily was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the pines. Then, so quietly it was barely sound, "She's not safe."
The men came.
Cole looked at Nora over Lily's head.
Nora's expression was unreadable. The armor she'd been wearing for 3 weeks, the one he'd never thought to try to see past. She was watching him the way you watch someone when you have not yet decided whether to trust them, and you know that trust, once misplaced, has consequences. "Get in the truck," he said. "Both of you. Tell me everything." Lily told it in pieces, the way a child tells a story, not in linear order, but in the order things mattered. The men had been following them for weeks, sometimes a gray car on the highway, sometimes a figure too far back on a trail to be accidental. Her mother had been scared but pretending not to be, the way Lily could always tell because she got very quiet and started making plans the way she did before big things. They'd been moving around, staying in different places, and 3 days ago Diana had driven to the Blackwater River trailhead, parked the car, and helped Lily crawl into the ravine with her backpack. She'd tucked the photograph deep in the front pocket. She'd made Lily repeat the name on the paper 3 times. And then she'd said she loved her, in exactly the way she said it every night at bedtime, not like it was the last time, and went back up the bank toward the trail. The men had come 20 minutes later. Lily had heard voices, low, 2 of them, businesslike rather than angry, and then a car engine, and then silence that had lasted 3 days.
"She had papers," Lily said.
"Not in my bag, in her own bag. She kept showing me like she wanted me to memorize them, but I was too little to understand the numbers.
She said they were important."
She said, she stopped, breathed carefully, she said they were the kind of important that makes bad people do bad things.
Cole looked at Nora again. Nora looked back.
Between them, something shifted, not warmth yet, not trust exactly, but the first thin filament of a thing that was pointed in that direction. "I know what document she's talking about," Cole said quietly.
Nora's expression didn't change.
"Of course you do."
"And I know who sent those men." His jaw tightened.
"I've suspected for 6 months. I just didn't have the proof. Or rather," he looked at Lily, "I didn't know where it was."
Nora stared at him. "Who?"
Cole was quiet for a moment, watching frost collect on the trailhead sign, the painted letters going silver-white in the morning light. "Vivienne Cross," he said. "I want to tell you that I responded to Cole's revelation with composure and clarity. That I sat in the warm cab of his truck and processed the information with the measured calm of a woman who has not been running on no sleep and emotional adrenaline since 3 in the morning, who has not spent the last several hours cycling through grief and anger and a strange, hollow kind of freedom, who did not just discover that the child in the seat beside her is connected to her husband by a thread that has nothing to do with business and everything to do with the kind of debt that
doesn't show up on a balance sheet. I did not do that."
"Vivienne Cross," I repeated, and my voice came out very carefully neutral in the way voices do when they are working hard not to be something less composed. "Vivienne Cross, who was in your study at 2 in the morning making you laugh and pressing you about whether our marriage meant anything to you. That Vivienne Cross is the person who sent men after this child's mother. I need to explain the conversation you heard. You really, genuinely do." Lily, with the impeccable timing of a 7-year-old who has decided she trusts the adults in the vehicle to sort themselves out, had fallen asleep against the window. The slight weight of her head against the glass, the small regular sound of her breathing, both of these things were simultaneously the most grounding and most heartbreaking things I had encountered in a very eventful night. Cole checked the mirrors, confirmed we were still alone in the empty parking lot, and then looked at me directly.
Not past me. Not at a point above my shoulder.
Directly at me, the way he'd never managed in 23 days of marriage. I was startled to discover that his eyes, which I had always registered as simply dark, were actually a very deep brown that caught the morning light and held it. "Vivienne has worked for my family for 16 years, he said. "She knows everything about the Hargrove legal structure, every contract, every account, every acquisition. She was essential to my father's operation and she's been essential to mine. I've never had reason to question her loyalty."
He paused.
"Until recently." "What changed?" "Small things. The way she positioned herself after the merger was announced, closer than professional proximity justified.
Questions about you that went beyond what the legal work required.
An interest in the timeline of the Calloway integration that felt less like due diligence and more like she was managing something I wasn't supposed to see."
His jaw tightened.
"And 6 months ago, An anomaly in the estate accounts that my auditor flagged and that Vivienne explained away so smoothly it took me 3 more months to realize the explanation didn't actually make sense. What does any of that have to do with Diana Marsh? Diana Marsh was a paralegal at the firm where Vivienne worked before she came to us.
15 years ago.
Diana found irregularities in client accounts, money moving in ways that were technically legal but ethically murky, the kind of thing that's hard to prove and easy to deny.
She reported it internally and was told she'd misunderstood the transactions.
So she kept copies of everything and she left.
I stared at him.
She's been holding those documents for 15 years. Waiting until she had somewhere safe to take them, or someone she trusted to take them to. Or until she felt threatened enough that the risk of keeping quiet outweighed the risk of speaking up.
He glanced at Lily.
I think when the merger went public, when Vivienne's name appeared in the press coverage of the Hargrove Calloway deal, Diana recognized her. And Vivienne recognized the risk.
So she sent men after her. I said it flatly. Not a question.
The documents from 15 years ago would establish a pattern. Vivienne has been running the same scheme through our accounts for the past 3 years, skimming from acquisitions, routing fees through shell entities she controls. The historical evidence would prove it wasn't an isolated incident. It would prove a 15-year practice.
His voice was very controlled.
Diana had everything she needed to destroy Vivienne entirely. Vivienne knew it. The weight of this settled over me slowly, the way cold settles into a room when the heat goes out. Not all at once, but spreading, finding every corner. And last night, I said. The conversation. Vivienne has been pushing for weeks, in exactly the way she pushed last night. Questions about you, about whether I valued the marriage, whether I thought of you as a real partner, what I actually felt.
He met my eyes.
I was irritated. I was tired. And I snapped back at her using the ugliest available language because I wanted her to stop. The condition of the deal. I was repeating the board's framing. Weaponizing their language to make Vivienne understand that her questions were inappropriate, that my personal life was not her territory to map and manage.
He stopped.
Started again, more slowly. I was not telling her what I believed. I was telling her what I wanted her to believe, so she would stop asking.
I sat with that.
Outside the truck windows, the morning had come up soft and gray, the kind of Tennessee October morning where the light arrives gradually, apologetically, like it's not sure it's welcome. I thought about standing in that hallway with the plaster cold against my back. I thought about 6 words that had felt like the final proof of something I'd been afraid was true. She wanted me to hear it, I said.
Cole was quiet for a moment. Yes.
I think so.
She knew I'd been having trouble sleeping.
She'd asked Mrs. Pruitt about my patterns. I noticed it but didn't think much of it at the time.
She knew I sometimes came downstairs late.
She arranged herself in your study at the right hour, with the door cracked just enough. I heard the flatness in my own voice and recognized it as the sound of controlled fury. She manufactured the whole thing. She used me as a tool to drive a wedge between us, so that when she made her move, whatever move she was planning, you'd be alone. She underestimated you, Cole said. She made a very common mistake, I said. She thought I was just the condition of the deal.
Something shifted in his expression.
I didn't have a name for it yet, but I filed it away.
Lily opened her eyes.
She looked at both of us with those mismatched, morning-clear eyes, assessed the situation with the efficiency of a child who has learned to read rooms quickly and for practical reasons, and then reached into her backpack. She removed the interior lining with a small, practiced motion, a hidden zipper at the base that someone had installed deliberately, and held out a folded envelope. "Mama put them in here," she said. She showed me where in case something happened and I had to give them to the right person. She looked at me, then at Cole.
"I think you're both the right people," she said.
Cole's throat moved. He took the envelope carefully, with both hands, the way you receive something from a child that you understand is not just an object but a testament. "Thank you, Lily," he said quietly. "You're welcome," Lily said. Then, "Can we go now? I'd really like to have a real breakfast." It was, I thought, the most reasonable request I'd heard in 24 hours. We drove back to Ashford Creek with the sun coming up over the ridgeline to our east, turning the sky that complicated shade of amber and rose that Tennessee does better than anywhere I've ever been. Cole called Marcus Webb with quiet, clipped instructions. I watched Lily watch the passing farmland with the focused attention of someone who has been cooped up in a ravine and finds the ordinary world astonishing.
At one point she pressed her forehead to the window to watch a small herd of horses in a field we passed. "My mama likes horses," she said, to no one in particular. Cole looked at her in the rearview mirror. "When we find her," he said, "we'll take you both to the Barlow farm. They have 12. Lily looked at the back of his head with those searching eyes. Then she said, "Okay," and turned back to the window, and I saw something loosen in her shoulders. The smallest, most guarded version of belief. We got back to the house at 8:30 with a child who needed a bath, a hot meal, and about 12 hours of sleep in a real bed. Mrs. Pruitt, who I had quietly underestimated for 3 weeks, took one look at the situation and pivoted into action with the efficiency of someone who has managed crises for longer than I've been alive. She had Lily clean and in borrowed clothes and sitting at the kitchen table with scrambled eggs and buttered toast before I had finished washing my own hands. I sat across from Cole at the kitchen table with Diana Marsh's documents spread between us and worked through them while he was on the phone. It took me 40 minutes, because Diana had been meticulous and I was thorough, and because the full picture that emerged required reading each piece in relation to the others before it came into focus. When it did, it was unambiguous. "It's worse than you knew," I said, when Cole finished his call. He sat down across from me. "How much worse?" "She's been stealing from you for 3 years. Systematically, carefully, with a sophisticated understanding of exactly how much could disappear through which channels without triggering automatic audit flags." I turned one of the documents so he could see my annotations. The historical material, what Diana found 15 years ago at the old firm, establishes the methodology. The same methodology appears in your accounts starting about 8 months after she came to work for your father. I paused. "She's been running this for 16 years total. You're the 3rd client she's taken from. The first 2 didn't have anyone like Diana watching." Cole looked at the documents in silence. I watched him process it, the betrayal of it, the scope of it, the particular quality of discovering that someone you trusted completely has been building a secret architecture inside the structure of your life. I knew that feeling. I'd had it with Derek. "Does this hold?" he asked finally. "Every piece documented. Bank records, transfer confirmations, internal memos Diana photographed. She kept digital backups. The originals are in a safety deposit box in Knoxville. The access information is in the envelope. She built an airtight case." I met his eyes. She was a paralegal for 12 years before she left the profession. She knew exactly what she was doing. "She knew she might not be there to deliver it," Cole said. "It came out rough. She prepared for it anyway," I said. "She prepared Lily. She made sure the evidence would find the right hands even if she couldn't bring it there herself." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Through the wall, we could hear Lily and Mrs. Pruitt engaged in what sounded like a spirited discussion about whether cereal counted as a legitimate second breakfast. Lily's position appeared to be yes. "I need to call the FBI," Cole said. "Yes. And a family law attorney. Today." I said it clearly, holding his gaze. "For Lily. Whatever we find out about her mother, that child needs legal protection and a designated advocate who isn't also managing a federal criminal case." He nodded, immediately, without hesitation. "Agreed. And I'm going to help you build the summary document for the FBI. You need someone who can present this clearly to agents who don't have context for the corporate structure." I straightened the papers. "That's what I do. That's what I'm good at." Cole looked at me with that expression again. The one I'd filed away in the truck, the one I didn't have a name for yet. "I know," he said. "You didn't, though. Not until this morning." "No," he admitted. "I didn't. I knew you were capable. Your record at Calloway made that clear before the merger was ever proposed. But I didn't," he stopped. "I didn't let myself see you as someone who was actually here. Actually present. I kept you at a distance and told myself it was appropriate given the circumstances." "It wasn't appropriate," I said. "It was cowardice dressed up as respect." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Yes," he said. "It was." We worked for 2 hours at that kitchen table. Me building the financial summary, Cole coordinating with Marcus and making calls I wasn't privy to and occasionally leaning over my shoulder to answer a question about the corporate structure with the focused precision of someone who knows his own business completely. We worked like people who have been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this, a problem serious enough to require both of them, a crisis that demanded the particular things each of them knew how to do. At one point Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in a pair of Mrs. Pruitt's borrowed socks, far too large, folded over at the ankle.
and announced that she had decided to name the teddy bear Galileo after the astronomer, because her mama had told her Galileo was someone who kept looking at the truth even when people tried to make him stop.
Cole looked up from his phone. Something crossed his face that I recognized, because I felt it too. "That's a good name," he said.
Lily considered him.
"I know," she said, and disappeared back down the hall. Marcus Webb located Diana Marsh at 2 that afternoon.
She was in a hospital in Knoxville, admitted 2 days ago under a false name, having survived what the attending physician described as a serious accident involving her vehicle being forced off a rural road. Broken arm, severe concussion, lacerations consistent with a crash rather than an assault, which told us that whoever Vivienne had sent had been careful about deniability.
Diana was alive.
She was going to recover.
She was asking for her daughter. I went to find Lily.
She was in the living room, methodically rearranging the books on Cole's shelf by color rather than alphabetically, which she apparently found more logical.
She had placed Galileo at the center of the bottom shelf as a kind of anchor. "Lily." I sat down beside her on the floor.
"We found your mama."
She went very still.
Her hands stopped moving on the spines of the books.
"She's in a hospital. She's hurt, but she's going to be okay.
She's been asking for you since she woke up." Lily sat with that for 3 full seconds. I counted them, watching her face, and then she started crying. Not the quiet, controlled crying of a child who has been trying not to fall apart. The real kind, big and messy and loud, the kind that has been stored up for 3 days in a ravine and is not going back in the bottle now. I pulled her into my lap and held her and let her cry until it was done. When she was quiet again, she said, from somewhere against my shoulder, "I knew she wasn't dead." I kept telling myself she wasn't dead.
"You were right," I said.
"Mama says being right isn't always enough, but it's better than the alternative."
Despite everything, I laughed.
"Your mama sounds like someone I need to know." "She's the best person," Lily said, with the absolute conviction of a child who has not yet found reason to qualify her highest praise. "She's also going to be really annoyed that I reorganized her files while she was gone."
A pause. "I do that when I'm scared."
I thought of the Calloway archives I'd spent 3 days reorganizing when I first arrived at Cole's house.
"Me too," I said quietly.
Vivienne Cross was arrested at her home office at 2:15 that afternoon.
Marcus was present when it happened.
He reported that she was composed up until the moment the FBI agent mentioned Diana Marsh by name. And then, for just a fraction of a second, something broke through the composure that was neither surprise nor fear but something older and more tired. The look of someone who has been running a long time and knows, finally, that the running is done.
Cole called me from the front porch when it was confirmed.
I stepped outside to take the call and he was there, phone still in hand, looking out at the pine trees along the back fence the way I'd looked at them at 2 in the morning from the bedroom window.
He heard my footstep on the porch boards and turned. "It's done," he said.
"All of it."
"Vivienne's in custody.
The FBI have the original documents. Marcus has statements from 3 of the Shell entity directors who will cooperate in exchange for reduced exposure. It's done."
He looked at me. Not past me. At me.
"You built the summary document that made it possible for the agents to move immediately instead of spending 2 weeks getting up to speed. That mattered."
"We built it," I said. Something settled in his expression.
Not quite a smile. Cole Hargrove's face was not yet fluent in smiles, but he was clearly working on it. "We built it," he agreed. We stood on the porch in the October cold for a moment. Through the kitchen window, I could see Lily and Mrs. Pruitt visible at the counter. Lily appeared to be explaining something at considerable length and with significant hand gestures. Mrs. Pruitt was nodding with what looked, from a distance, like genuine engagement. "She can't go back to where they were living," Cole said. "It's not safe yet, and Diana is going to need weeks of recovery."
He paused. "I'd like them to stay here. Both of them. For as long as they need." "Yes," I said, immediately. "And after, Lily stays in contact."
Whatever happens with her mother's situation, whatever is decided legally about where they go from here, we stay in Lily's life. I said it with a certainty that surprised me a little, the way you're sometimes surprised by the things you discover you're sure about.
"She found us."
"That means something." "It means something," Cole said. He was looking at me with that expression, the nameless one, and this time I let myself try to read it instead of filing it away. What I found was not what I expected. It was not the careful, measured regard of a man managing a situation. It was something much simpler and much more frightening and, underneath the fright, much better. "Cole," I said. "I need you to talk to me."
Not just today, not just when there's a crisis.
I need you to actually talk to me.
I know. He turned to face me fully.
I have spent the last 23 days afraid that if I said anything real, I would say the wrong thing and break something I couldn't repair.
So I said nothing.
I maintained distance. And I broke it anyway. His voice was very controlled and very honest, the way voices get when someone is using every tool they have to say something true.
I'm sorry, Nora. Not the logistical kind.
The actual kind.
I know the difference, I said.
I know you do. He reached out and touched the silver bracelet on my wrist, the lightest press of his thumb against the engraved inside face of it.
You came back, he said. You didn't have to come back this morning.
You could have taken Lily somewhere else and let someone else deal with everything.
But you came back.
I came back, I said, because Lily needed you.
And because I stopped. Found the true version of the sentence.
Because I needed to know if what I heard was the whole truth. I needed to give you the chance to be more than what I heard through that door.
Was I? He asked quietly. More than that.
I looked at him on that porch in the October cold, this man who had driven 12 miles at 6 in the morning to find his wife, who had crouched in a parking lot to talk to a frightened child at eye level, who had said her mother's name with grief in his voice for a promise he'd been unable to keep, who had sat at a kitchen table with me for 2 hours and worked like a partner. And I said, yes.
You are.
January in Ashford Creek is brutal. Wind off the mountains, black ice on the switchbacks, the kind of cold that makes you feel like the world has simplified itself down to warmth versus not warmth, and warmth is all that matters.
The Hargrove house is warm.
Extremely warm, actually, because Lily has very strong opinions about thermostat settings. She believes in what she calls real heat as opposed to what she describes as polite heat, and she has also discovered the gas fireplace in the living room and considers every successful ignition a personal triumph. Cole bought her a fireplace safety guide and a pair of insulated gloves, which she accepted with the gravity of someone receiving professional equipment. Diana Marsh was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks after her accident.
She and Lily are in the guest suite. This was meant to be temporary.
None of us have discussed when it will end, because none of us are in any hurry. Diana is quieter than Lily in the way that deep rivers are quieter than the creeks that feed them. She has her daughter's mismatched eyes and her daughter's habit of watching rooms before speaking into them, and a dry wit that has, on more than one occasion, made Cole exhale a surprised laugh over his coffee in a way that still startles me a little with its warmth. She and I have had 3 long conversations at the kitchen table after everyone else has gone to bed, about what it means to carry something important for a long time alone, about the moment when keeping quiet finally stops being survival and starts being complicity, about the specific courage required to trust people you've been taught not to trust.
She is extraordinary. Lily comes by it honestly.
I reorganized my professional life in the weeks after the arrest. With the merger proceeding on terms that no longer required me to function as a symbolic ornament, and with Cole having rebuilt the Hargrove legal and compliance teams from the ground up, I took a consulting role in the restructured Calloway-Hargrove integration. It turned out, as I had always suspected, in the part of myself I'd been keeping quiet, that I was very good at this. The integration work required exactly the combination of things I'd spent my career building: the Calloway operational knowledge, the financial analysis skills, the ability to walk into a room full of people who assumed I was decorative and produce work that required a reassessment. My father called on a Tuesday to say he was proud of me. He said it in the way of a man who knows he should have said it more and is starting late and is not sure the language will do what he needs it to do. I told him it was enough.
I meant it.
Derek is in a residential treatment program in Chattanooga.
He calls on Sundays.
The calls are short and careful and nothing like the calls we used to have when we were younger, and he was the golden one and I believed in him without conditions. But they happen every Sunday without fail, which is its own kind of promise, and I'm learning that some relationships have to be rebuilt from different materials than they were first built with.
Cole and I have our fights.
I want to be honest about that, because this is a true story and true stories include the parts that aren't romantic. We fight about the way he defaults to unilateral decisions when he's under pressure, and about the way I go quiet and efficient when I should go loud, and about the thermostat. Yes, we too have opinions about the thermostat, and they do not perfectly align with Lily's. We fight and we resolve it, badly and then better. And every time we do, something between us that had been held at a formal distance gets a little closer to the temperature of something real. We held a small ceremony in January. Not a second wedding. We were already married, legally and apparently permanently, and Cole had made a point of telling me that he had no intention of repeating the first one because he intended to do a great deal better.
This was a recommitment. A renewal of vows we should have meant the first time and are choosing to mean now.
Gideon Webb, Marcus's younger brother and Cole's closest friend since the 4th grade, stood at Cole's side with the expression of a man who has been told to keep it together and is doing his level best. Diana sat in the front row next to Lily, thin and still a little pale from her recovery but present, with the focused attention of someone who understands that what they are watching matters. Mrs. Pruitt stood at the back of the room and refused to sit down and cried quietly into a handkerchief she'd had the foresight to bring. Lily sat in the absolute center of the front row in a dress she had selected herself, dark blue velvet with small gold stars embroidered on the cuffs, which she had announced paired well with the occasion, with Galileo the teddy bear on her knee and an expression of someone who is watching the conclusion of a story they have believed in since the middle. I didn't prepare remarks, because I've never in my life been able to read from a page what I was feeling in my chest. I stood across from Cole in the January light coming through the tall windows, in a dress that was mine, not my mother's, not borrowed, not appropriate to a transaction. And I said, I came into this marriage with nothing left and nowhere else to be. I told myself it was survival and I told myself that was enough. I expected to become invisible here, and for a while, I did, or I let myself, which is different. I was the condition of the deal and I had made my peace with that. I looked at him. But you came to find me at 6 in the morning. And you crouched down in a parking lot to talk to a child you'd never met like she deserved the full weight of your attention. And you sat across a kitchen table from me and worked like I was your partner. And you said I'm sorry in the actual way, the way that costs something. I felt the tightness in my throat that means something true is trying to get out and I let it. You earned this. Every day since that morning in the parking lot. You have earned it. And I choose you. Not because the deal required it. Because you showed me who you are when you stopped managing the distance between us. I choose you, Cole. From the front row, Lily said, loudly, in the carrying voice of a child who does not entirely understand indoor volumes, I told Galileo this would happen. He was skeptical but I was right. Diana pressed her lips together very hard. Gideon Webb looked at the ceiling. Mrs. Pruitt's handkerchief was getting a great deal of use. Cole's voice, when he spoke, was rough in the way it gets when he is being more honest than is comfortable for him, which is my favorite version of him. I have spent my whole life treating emotional distance as a professional advantage. I was good at it. I will not pretend that is not true. He held my hands, both of them, with the careful grip of someone who has learned, recently, at some cost, with full attention, what holding something means. But I am telling you, in front of everyone in this room, that I am done. Done managing you. Done protecting myself by keeping you at arm's length. Done being the kind of man who watches someone plant herbs in his garden and doesn't say a single word about how much it changes something in him. A breath. I love you, Nora. I have loved you since the parking lot, in the cold, when you looked at me with no patience left for anything except the truth. I will love you every day we have. That is my promise. When he kissed me, Lily cheered with the wholehearted commitment of someone who has been waiting for the payoff of a story she's been following since the first chapter. Gideon Webb cleared his throat twice, which was as much as he was going to permit himself. Diana reached over and took Lily's hand, and Lily leaned into her mother's shoulder, and the afternoon light fell across both of them in a way that made something in my chest go very still and very full. Outside, the January wind moved through the pines along the back fence, the same pines I had stood at the window staring at on the last night. I told myself this was only survival, and somewhere in the cold white morning a cardinal called out, that startlingly bright winter sound, and the house around us was warm. I had walked out into the October dark with nothing. I had walked back in and built something worth staying for. I came home with everything.